Sweet friends, I'm Emily Fletcher, and I want to welcome you to a very special bonus episode of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? This is part of our special Ziva Magik series, where we're going to dive into the mystical and life-changing conversations that are going to help you remember just how creative and how powerful you already are. So today's episode is a compilation of some of my favorite and some of the most profound moments from the entire series of Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? This is a compilation to help us remember and to reclaim the divine femininity inside of all of us, and this includes all genders. So as we gear up for a free live activation called Magic Maker that's happening on July 22nd, I wanted to create this special episode for you to remind you that there is a power inside of you that does not come from force. It does not come from trying. It does not come from muscling through reality. It comes from alignment, from attunement, from receptivity and magnetism. You're about to hear from an extraordinary lineup of humans, including Blue, Sarah Jenks, Layla Martin, Magik, Zach Bush, and Aubrey Marcus. And together they're going to share their raw truth, they're going to share ancient wisdom, sacred rage, and deep devotion, guiding us to remember what we've forgotten about the masculine and the feminine, and what happens when we reclaim both for ourselves. And I'm really inspired that you chose this particular episode to listen to, because here's what it tells me about you. You're someone who knows or intuits that there is more to life than just what we've been taught through doctrine and dogma. You're someone who might have felt the ache of something being erased from our history and the desire to bring it back. You're ready to reclaim your intuition, your sensuality, your power, and your embodiment, and live as the whole radiant being that you were born to be. So before we dive in, I have a very special invitation for you. On July 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I am hosting a free live activation called Magic Maker. Now, this is not just another manifesting workshop. This is a full-body, real-time activation where I'm going to guide you through the 3-part Ziva Magik formula, where you're going to get to have a taste of what happens inside of Ziva Magik, which is a powerful blend of ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience, and most importantly, embodied manifesting. This activation is going to help you get crystal clear on what you want, learn how to alchemize those stuck emotions that might have been holding you back, and discover the science behind why feeling good is the key to magnetizing your desires. Now, all you have to do is go to makemagic.zivameditation.com to save your spot. That's makemagic.zivameditation.com. And when you save your spot, you're going to get instant access to a quiz. Now, this quiz is actually a really powerful assessment tool that's going to prepare you for the activation on July 22nd. It's called What's Blocking Your Magic? And in just 2 minutes, you're going to discover your unique manifesting superpower, what may have been blocking you from the things that you really want, and more importantly, how to start clearing that block live together on July 22nd at Magic Maker. So let's dive in. May this bonus episode remind you who you really are.
Why is Mary Magdalene depicted as a whore in the story of Christ in the Bible? This crushes my soul. A woman that has integrated her sacred sensuality, recognizing every single person on this planet, A, came from a woman, B, orgasm is the place of creation, is the heightened state of manifestation, is the heightened state of consciousness, is the opportunity to initiate Jesus Christ into Christ consciousness through the integration of the masculine and the feminine within himself, and through the sacred union into activating his car body to a place of light so that he could transcend physical form and return to this earth to remind all of us of Christ consciousness. Why is she depicted as a whore? It hurts my soul. It crushes me on a level of being a woman in this life that is connected to nature, that is connected to her sensuality, that is connected to her sisters, that is connected to her voice, that is connected to God and the goddess. Why is she a whore? This is what is killing this planet, because we have forgotten how to listen to her. And not just women, but the her within all of us.
Yes, the her within all of us,
the her
feminine
within
in
all of us. And so it's taken me on a journey to understand, where have I neglected the her within myself? Where have I shamed myself? Where have I called myself a witch that needs to be outcasted? Where have I silenced my voice because I'm afraid of being too much? Where have I shut down my sexuality because it's not safe? Where have I told myself that magic isn't real and to get my head out of the clouds? This is all a part of me that has got lost in the story that says that she is a whore.
Mm-hmm.
And how can I use my life as a resurrection of all of the women that have been, of the Joan of Arc that sits around my neck, of the Ankh that is the integration of the yoni and the phallus together, where the Christian church did not take out the yoni and make it completely phallus. The yoni is integrated in the Ankh because it's the divine balance of the masculine and the feminine, the sacred principles, the Yeshua and the Magdalene consciousness that accesses us into a higher state of being for humanity. I want the real, and I want it for myself, and I want it for my children, and I want it for my brothers, and I want it for my sisters, and I want it for my family, and I want it for the future generations, and I want it for all sentient life. And I don't know what the truth is. I don't always know what the truth is, but what Ichiro once said to me is, I don't know what the truth is, but I know what love feels like, and I follow that every single day. And to be honest, completely disintegrating the feminine within ourselves on this planet and our relationship to Mother Earth and our relationship to the feminine of the past is not love to me.
It is not love.
So I'm just following it every single day of what love actually is. And I'm getting closer and closer to what feels like vibrational alignment and truth in my being from an integrated place of wholeness. And I am devoted to sharing from that place.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you have done on yourself to be able to channel that much power, that much wisdom, that much beauty, that much truth in such a poetic and concentrated amount of time. I was just on our dear friend Allie's podcast, and interestingly, I really went to church and I got on my pulpit and I was talking about Mary Magdalene, and she said, I wish that the whole world could hear that. And right now I feel the same. I wish that like billions and billions of people could hear that sermon that you just gave. So I'll ask you what she asked me a few hours ago. What do you think would change on planet Earth if all 8 billion people could hear and at least receive that transmission? They don't have to agree with it. They don't have to act on it. But what would happen if you feel like billions of people could remember the divine feminine inside of them and at least have access to the knowledge that she has been forcibly and purposefully removed from our stories and from our history?
Mm-hmm. I think that we would have a more compassionate world that realizes that how you hurt another is how you hurt yourself. And that level of empathy comes from our gut, comes from our intuition, comes from our feeling. Now, for somebody to hurt another person, they have to be very disconnected from their ability to feel. And this is what we're seeing with the wars on the planet. And once our empathy is activated, it's not an easy path to feel, because you start to feel the pain of the planet. You start to feel the consequences of your actions. But it also means that you start to live a more aligned, loving and heart-centered life. So it would mean that the world became more feeling. And then we would realize that how I hurt another is how I hurt myself. How I do unto neighbor is how I do to myself. And we would stop hurting people. We would actually start to create more healing in our wake than we do create pain. And we would actually start birthing a new epoch of humanity. I believe that.
I don't see how it doesn't happen. Like, I don't see how we reclaim and herald the divine feminine as much as the divine masculine, and it couldn't create a new epoch of humanity, because we've seen for ourselves what that magic can do in our own bodies and our own relationships and our own sexuality and our own manifestation practices. And that's just one person. You start to get many people accessing that magic with that unity inside of themselves, and you create a bigger antenna. The prayers get stronger, the downloads get clearer. And this is why this vision of and I think that's why I've been so guided over the last 3 years to help people remember that they can use the sexual energy to manifest, that they can use the most creative force on the planet, not just to call in a new car or whatever, but actually birth the new earth that our hearts know is possible, as our friend Charles Eisenstein says. I would love to go back to when you said, we have not had models for the divine feminine. We've not had models for the sacred feminine, because if you go into mostly any church or even like Buddhist temple, I've been studying the Vedas for 16 years. Like, look at the iconography. You have Jesus on the front. You have God represented as a man, which is the hilarity of trying to gender something as big as God is just really, really laughable.
Yeah.
And then I went to visit the Dalai Lama. I went to Dharamshala, and all around the perimeter of the room, it's all men. When I do puja ceremony in my tradition, it's the holy tradition, and it's all men. And so this iconography really does matter, because we cannot be something if we cannot see something.
Yeah.
And so can you say more about like what is the sacred feminine? And how would one go about discovering this iconography if they identify as feminine or female and wanted to start to see a model of what that is, that they can start to wake up the divinity inside of themselves?
Yeah, and I think it's really important for everybody, regardless of your gender, to have sacred feminine stories and visuals and myths in your life, because this is what I believe is that this is what is going to bring the feminine and women back to their rightful place on this planet, is bringing the sacred mythology back into our culture. So the first pieces of art that archaeologists have found is the Venus of Willendorf, which is this tiny figurine that has this really voluptuous belly and these very voluptuous breasts. So we know through art that what humans were really obsessed with. And so all of the art from the Neolithic period are all these elderly, crone, voluptuous female deities. And the first place they ever found a place of worship was shaped like a woman's body, and you entered through her vagina. And at the
cave,
right? And at the spring equinox, the sun shines straight through her vagina up to the crown of her head. So we know from that, and from the histories that's been saved, and from the stories that have been passed down, that for, tens and hundreds of thousands of years, that God was a woman, and that we worshiped the female form. We worshiped like literally women's bodies as a direct emissary of the goddess. We were worshiped for our fertility, for our creativity, and we were held in regard and with respect.
Well, it is the matrix point for the entire civilization.
Exactly.
For anyone to be birthed from the unmanifest into the manifest, it must come through this.
We are the water slide
portal
of the divine into human form.
Yes.
And it's so, and I love how you called out, like the oracles of Delphi are a really great example, where all over the world, the center of community were the priestesses. That at the center of every town, the center of every city was a temple. And, in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, these temples were, massive, huge, gorgeous pieces of architecture. And in some places they were caves, in other places they were huts. But every single community, its center was the priestess. And just like you said, no one would go to war without consulting with the priestesses. No one would choose an heir to the throne without consulting with the priestesses. And a lot of times the priestesses were also the queens. So Cleopatra was a high priestess and was also the queen. And Queen Sheba was also a priestess and a queen. And so we see these threads also coming together where, church and state were not that separate. And when the sacred feminine was part of our everyday life, there were just, centuries of peace, because it was a culture of egalitarianism and working together and for the one. And what happened was, in many little ways, the oppressive patriarchy started to take over, because when you have egalitarian societies, no one person can be in power. And the people that were in power were actually in service to the collective. And that's very different. And you can see how if someone wanted to gain a lot of power and be able to manipulate large amounts of people, that they would have to take away the sacred feminine, because taking away the sacred feminine is the same thing as taking away egalitarian culture.
And how do you define egalitarianism in this context?
I mean, really, everyone being in service to the one, and men and women working together in a non-hierarchical relationship.
So this feels important to me because I think it's because most of us have been raised almost exclusively in a patriarchal society.
Yep.
We don't really understand what a matriarchy would look like or an egalitarian society would look like, because all we can really see is like, oh, well, if women were in power, it would just be the reverse.
Right, but it's not.
It's not.
Because in a matriarchy, it's non-hierarchical. And what they have studied through, archaeology and history, and going back and rereading a lot of the books, because when women go back and translate ancient texts, they get a very different translation than when men translate them. So it's so great that we're having more women in, becoming archaeologists and really re-looking at history, because it's just been really important for the discovery of what it meant to be a woman, and to, really bring back all of these stories, because the erasure was so close to being complete. And in a matriarchy, what this looks like is half of the CEOs are women. We can talk about this on a global scale, but what I want to bring it down to is like just looking at, if you are a woman and you are married to a man, just looking at your marriage, do you really feel like you are in a non-hierarchical relationship? Because this is what I spend a lot of time on in my work, is how do we see these wider, more mythical, generalized ideas playing out in just our marriages? So for me, what happened was I had a baby, I became a mother, and all of the sudden, I just decided one day that I should really work on winding my business down so I could be a stay-at-home mom when Jonathan was done with residency. And I started creating this exit plan. And but at the time I was the primary breadwinner because Jonathan was in residency, but I was also 100% taking care of the house and 100% taking care of the kids. And Jonathan would come home in the worst mood, and I would just try to be Little Miss Sunshine and smooth things over and make sure everything was okay. And I am a highly educated feminist doing this. So I just had this moment where I was like, what is happening? It was like something abducted my body. And that's when I really started digging into the conditioning. And what I brought it to, and I kept asking myself, were women always like this? And that's when I started really understanding priestess culture. And for me specifically, what I brought back with the motherhood issue is I went back to the burning times and I studied what was happening during the burning times in Europe.
What are the burning times?
So the burning times is when the Catholic Church came in after rewriting the Bible and decided that any person that was not going to be Christian could be tortured and killed.
Any person, any gender.
Well, that's what they said. But the truth is that they were targeting non-married women.
And older women
who were widows. Because what was actually happening was that they were trying to aggregate power. And at that time when that was happening, there was this amazing two system culture where in the cities, Christianity had taken root, but there was this blending where the winter solstice became Christmas and, spring equinox became Easter. And, there's all this blending. And a lot of people from the cities, they'd still go out to the countryside and they'd talk to the witches when they had a stomach ache, they needed something. There was a thriving sacred feminine ecosystem that was happening during that time. And a lot of women owned land. And a lot of women had access to land. And a lot of women were stewards of money. So what do you need? And so what was happening was not all these women were having babies. And if you want to create a new economic revolution, you need to make sure that you have a really massive workforce that isn't going to question you. And the best way to have a workforce is to make sure that women are churning out babies and to make sure the men are not distracted. So that's where we had this blending of women who were sensual or distracting men because they were beautiful. So any woman could point to another beautiful woman and say she's a witch because she's turning her husband's head. Any widow was called a witch, mostly probably because she was just pissed and sort of a drag for the people who were trying to, snatch up all the land. And so the only women who were left were women who were married to men who were of childbearing years. And so what I believe
And talk about iconography.
Oh
Like
my
if you
God.
go into a Christian church, it's Mary, the mother.
Right, exactly.
Women are only portrayed in that
Yep.
role as mother.
Exactly. And I'd love to talk about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, what happened was I looked at, I'm like, oh, of course. So it's like the conditioning comes from all that trauma. And because, of course, in the next generations, the mothers are going to tell their kids, like, get married, have babies. It's the only way you're going to survive. And that was true for a very long time. And then at some point, it just gets passed down generation to generation, and we kind of lose the thread. And there's also, all these really great studies about epigenetics, about how we inherit the trauma from our ancestors. And so I had a baby, I became a mother, and I immediately wanted to, sorry, I keep hitting this. I immediately wanted to cut off all parts of myself. But when I looked back at the burning times and I understood the reason why they were doing that, and I saw that it was a tool, that wiping away the sacred feminine was a tool of control and a tool of conditioning, I got so mad. And through that anger, I found myself again.
Yeah.
And it was such a blessing. And then I started going deeper, where I started looking at Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and really understanding, who are these women? Because what I had been hearing at the time, because I wasn't necessarily paying attention, for a while, Mary Magdalene was a prostitute and Mother Mary was just this like pious woman who never had sex. And then there was this announcement, that the Pope decided that Mary Magdalene was a disciple again. And I'm like, okay, so I really started digging in. What I learned through that process is that both Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene were incredible priestesses that were both trained in the temples of Isis and in the temples of Dendara as anointing priestesses. And Mary Magdalene brought her anointing oils to Jesus when they met. And when, Christ means the anointed one. So Jesus isn't Jesus Christ. He is only Jesus Christ because he was anointed by Mary Magdalene.
Wow.
And what I believe is that, because during this time, the Jewish rabbis of the time were doing this oppressive patriarchal dance in that area of the world. But all around them, still in ancient Greece, still in Egypt, there were still sacred feminine priestesses at the center of these communities. And so you can imagine both Jesus and Mary Magdalene are going to Egypt and seeing all of these amazing, powerful women. But then they're going back home and the rabbis are telling them that women are evil, that women are dirty. That's when they started separating men and women from all of the worship. And I believe that Jesus and Mary Magdalene got together, that they are two wings of the same bird, the masculine and the feminine Christ, and said, actually, it's men and women who are the conduits of the divine. And you don't have to go through a rabbi or a priest or a king in order to access the divine. In the Bible, they translated one of the words of Jesus is, I am the way, which a lot of people took as, oh, Jesus is the only gateway to God. But if you go back to the original text, it actually says, I am is the way. So just feel that I am is the way.
I am is the way.
And their teachings were really about, how do you bring heaven down into earth?
Yes.
Right now?
Yes.
And that we are all expressions of the divine in human form. And no one needs to go to a church. We can if we want to, but you can experience God anywhere.
Yes.
And when we reclaim Mother Mary as a high priestess who is an incredible sex magician and did in this amazing conscious conception practice, and Mary Magdalene being the feminine Christ, we see ourselves differently.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I was able to look to Mary Magdalene to see that she's a mother and she has a huge ministry and she has this non-hierarchical relationship with Jesus. And that helped me look at, how do I balance work and motherhood, and how do I want to show up in my marriage? And I believe that when women learn the way that it's supposed to be, that we automatically change how we're acting in our inner world and in our inner lives.
We've been on quite a ride.
Yes, we have.
We have been on quite a journey. So I would love to start with asking you, like, what inspired you to even create this high priestess pilgrimage for us? And can you define what a high priestess is?
Yes. So what inspired me to create this pilgrimage is that as a little girl and a little white girl growing up in America, it wasn't just that God was a man, right? I grew up Catholic. You go to church on Sunday, God is a man, Jesus is a man, Holy Spirit, like spirit, but like probably maybe a dude, I don't know, right? Maybe a dude. We're not going to talk about it. And women certainly are not spiritual leaders.
All the people giving the sermons are men.
All the people giving the sermons are men, right? But beyond that, right, even further. So, and what's interesting is, like, you know, the Pope reaffirmed very recently, like, women are not capable of holding spiritual transmission.
This Pope?
Yes.
Oh.
In Christianity. We're reaffirming women have no place in leadership in the church, right? It still runs that deep, that if you have a pussy, you do not belong in spiritual leadership. But deeper than that, right, there was the stories of what a witch is, right? Scary, like nose, like big nose, living in the forest alone, probably eating babies, stewing frogs,
lizards.
Right? Yeah, maybe you dress up, as one for Halloween, but like you don't want to be one. And deeper than that, right? Those women got killed and burned. So even in high school, like, what did we learn? Like Salem witch burning, right? Or hanging of the witches. Like, that's literally what you learn in high school, is witches got killed, witches were burned. And the etymology of the word witch, it comes from wisdom, and it comes from the old Indo-European word of being able to see. So a witch is one who can see. A witch is one who is wise. And so when you look all the way through the history, why were the wise ones and eventually the wise women, but it was people of all genders, people who wanted to allow everyone in their community to directly know themselves as the divine, to have a direct relationship to divinity? Why were those people not only killed, but then in our very lifetimes, why were the stories we were told about them so scary, right? And even still to this day, right, it's becoming cool to do witchcraft again. In fact, Gen Z is so excited. Witchcraft is like the top topic for teenage girls. And in our generations and older, it's still scary. And even for me, like, I started studying spirituality 20 years ago, like Eastern spirituality, Tantra. And for the longest time, I was like, I would not be a witch. Witches are like messing with nature. They're doing, spells. Like, that's a joke. What I didn't realize was witches are the wise women in every fucking culture, regardless of what you want to call it, right? They're the medicine women, the shamans in the European tradition, the witches, right? And they exist globally, of women in their spiritual power, in their sovereignty. And actually, I would argue that it's bigger than that, because even saying, like, to be in your spiritual power, you have to be a priest, you have to go through the Christian church, you have to be celibate, is a way of controlling men's spirituality and people of all genders. So this awakening started to make me feel like, okay, I am a witch and a high priestess. They're the same thing, right? A witch is kind of the lower word of what you call a high priestess. to make her seem lower than she is, but I want us to reclaim both words. I want us, every single one of us, to reclaim our ability to caretake spirituality in our own lives and in our own bodies, and to be a lighthouse for others to see that as well. And I think you can be a high priestess of any tradition. I think you can be a high priestess of the Christian tradition, and we'll talk about what that looked like and how there were high priestesses of the Christian tradition. I think you can be a high priestess of your tantric tradition, of your religion with no name tradition, of your nature tradition, of your Buddhist tradition. And you can claim the word high priestess, which to me is a female who creates ritual spaces for herself and others to taste the divine, to touch the divine, to know their own divine nature. That's what a high priestess is. And in the European tradition, which then spread all over, that woman became called a witch, and she was killed for wanting to show others that not only were they God and they had a divine wisdom and a divine essence, but that they were empowered to hold sacred space for others to remember their own divine nature. And so this journey to me is to go back to these ancient sites and see that there was a time when women were in leadership, spiritual leadership. And this is really key in Eleusis, and we talk about this in our journey. The government protected them. Society protected them. They didn't go after them. They didn't kill them. They didn't threaten them. They didn't deny them their spiritual authority. They protected them so that they could transmit spiritual wisdom to the people, to the masses, and how important that transmission was. So as we go and reconnect to our own spiritual sovereignty and power, the invitation on this journey is for all of us to reconnect to our spiritual sovereignty and power. And this journey, to me, it's not just spirituality, it's your own spiritual connection to yourself, to your body, to your own divinity, changes the way you make love, changes the way you fall in love, changes the way you eat food. And so this journey for us hasn't just been like, la-di-da-di-da, let's claim high priestess reality. It's been, how do I face sickness, right? You've been sick this entire trip. For me, it's been, how do I relate to the beauty of my own body and my struggle with that? How do we celebrate life without feeling guilty? How do we own lovemaking between us, our own expression of bisexuality and our expression of lovemaking in the world, our own eros? So when we talk about this, it's not just this, ooh, let's wear snakes and goddess dresses at some ancient Greek site. It's so real for you and I, and it's so real for everyone, how this reclamation of spiritual power changes every aspect of our being.
Wow, thank you so much for articulating that so beautifully. And there's things I want to underscore and highlight. One, you said the religion that has no name. And this is a new term or concept for me. I'd never heard this before reading The Immortality Key. So I do want to just introduce The Immortality Key, which is a beautiful book by Brian Marescu. And it's an extraordinary journey of this man's 10-year research pilgrimage on basically seeing what he could find to prove that, one, women were serving medicine, what type of medicine they were serving. And now specifically at Eleusis, like you mentioned, it's not just about not having to hide who you are. It's not just about not having to hide being a wise woman. It's like, what would it feel like to have a whole infrastructure built around it, and having the world leading politicians, the world leading philosophers, everyone who was anyone came to Eleusis to experience the Eleusinian mysteries. Yes. Now, why is that? Because they got to die before they died. They actually got to go through a portal and have a direct experience of the divine, which reminds us that we are a part of the one, right? We are some of the one, that we are a wave on the ocean. And we get to experience that viscerally, again, is so much more powerful than just sitting in a pew and having someone tell you what you should and should not do with your body, which is what most people's experience of doctrine and dogmatic religions are. Now, I want to just acknowledge that I know that many people have had direct experiences of God through Catholicism, through Christianity, through, our more familiar doctrine and dogmatic religions. Yes, God is everywhere all the time. So this is not like I don't want this to be like a witch hunt against Catholicism. It's just naming that actually God is everywhere, and that any sort of campaign to make us forget that, it's time for that to be eradicated.
Can you define the word witch for us?
Yeah, the word witch actually in Old German just means wise. One who sees, one who knows, one with wisdom. It's where we get wicked, wisdom, wizard, all of these words originate in the same place.
From
And
wise.
From wise. Yeah, from wise or wisdom. The Norse word was vice, like how they write Wicca would have been pronounced vice. And so, yeah, it's an old word, and it was changed, obviously, and turned against us, and historically has come to mean evil and manipulation. Even in one, I believe it was the King James version of the Bible, they changed the word manipulation to witchcraft. And so much of what's been done to systematically suppress our magic and our power and our healing gifts, right? Like all medicine used to come from plants. So you relied on your witch. Imagine if we did what we did to witches to doctors. If you were like, all the doctors are fucking evil, let's kill them, like burn them all, that would be crazy in our modern age. But that's exactly what happened back then. And so much of the ways that witches have been suppressed and turned against is in mistranslation of the Bible. Even the word ruach, like the Holy Spirit, spirit comes from spirare in Latin, which means to breathe or to breathe life into. So the word in Aramaic that the Bible was written in actually meant wind. It's like the Holy Spirit
was
is the wind. Yeah.
Coming back to God is nature.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I think that for me, that word and crafting, right, to craft your wisdom is about living a life that is informed by your embodied wisdom, right? You can have conceptual knowledge. You can learn a really hard lesson. You can like date a shitty guy and then like date somebody just like him the next time. Or you can learn from that lesson and change that knowledge into wisdom and say, actually, I'm going to make a different choice and I'm going to be someone different, or I'm going to choose something different from here on out. And that to me is how we craft our wisdom. And everyone has wisdom, right? You have Vedic wisdom and Tantric wisdom, and we've got Buddhist wisdom, and there's all these different types of wisdom. Everybody's a witch. And I think that it's very apparent how we got here in this modern day. It's like such, agony and atrocity and disconnection from nature and from ourselves and mental illness and just all of the things, because we've villainized our wisdom. We've demonized wisdom. We've made it evil. And so, yeah, I appreciate all the acknowledgments, because it is crazy and really fucking brave to blaze a trail in this way. There are some amazing elders, Clarissa Pinkola Estes and Starhawk. There are some OG elder witches still crushing it in the modern day. And yeah, I really have blazed a trail for myself, and that means you get a lot of fire in your face. And it's been such a gift. And it was this hat. This was really the thing that changed everything, because to so many people, it is this penultimate expression of evil. And yet when I put it on, and all these women and men, honestly, I have tons of men in my audience, tons of men in my programs, tons of male clients. Like, I work with so many men. It's crazy. I love it. I'm so grateful. And this hat showed to those people, it was like a beacon and a lighthouse. It was like, hey, we can be magical again now. We can reclaim this power that has been taken from us. We can remember our wisdom and utilize it and walk forward, not only in alignment with it, but in service to it. And that has been such an incredible gift for me. And it does, it's not easy. It is a hard path, because not everybody gets it. And there's so many people who have been so deeply religiously programmed, but I have so many Christian people and Jew witches and Hindu witches and Muslim witches. Like, I got witches from everywhere. And I think that that's because my intention is to just connect people to whatever their magic is and whatever their relationship to God is. And you can find God in nature. It's not just some disembodied, punitive dude up in the sky.
Judging you for masturbating.
Yeah, like you can find God in masturbation. Like,
Amen.
We've certainly learned that, haven't we, honey? And so I think that that's really why people resonate with the way that I teach, is because you get to do it your own way, because your wisdom is going to be unique. Your life experience, your lessons, everything you've learned throughout your existence is going to be unique. And all of that is what supports you in crafting your witchery.
Beautiful. I know that Mary Magdalene has played a role in you and helped you even to grieve, but how has working with Mary Magdalene energy, how has moving through this portal helped you to either balance or activate this masculine and feminine inside of you?
That whole pattern of the solution is outside of yourself and you have to go find it has been played out in every aspect of our society. Religion is just a tiny example of it, but you look at our macroeconomics, our microeconomics, you look at politics, you look
Medicine.
at education as a whole. Medicine is a great example of it. And so we have repeatedly been told that we are dysfunctional, we are broken, we are diseased, we are sick, we are sinners, we are this. And so now you need this drug, you need this pharmaceutical, or you need this scripture, or you need this experiential experience to become whole again. And the Mary Magdalene journey took me smack into the realization of the worst way in which we do this, perhaps. Certainly the most disempowering way that we do these externalizations is in relationship. And so that was the thing that really blew my life apart more than anything other single discovery in life. And so when you say, Mary Magdalene, what is that about? Well, I guess it's about a human that wrote a story from her experience about the transcendent nature of the capacity of the masculine and feminine to intertwine, not just between human beings, but first in yourself. How did Mary Magdalene become a holy grail? How did Christ and that whole life become something of a holy grail in which life could be transformed, life could be fundamentally shifted in the form of what we now call today miracles? How did miracles get manifested through these people that were just human beings at the time? What were they confirmationally achieving inside of themselves, such that if somebody ill and dying came and stood next to them, touched the edge of their clothing, could be spontaneously healed, spontaneously remitted? I have seen spontaneous remission happen. I know that miracles happen. We have to have a term in medicine called spontaneous remission because writing miracles in medical charts is not accepted. We are literally told you cannot do that. What does that actually look like? That looks like somebody who has stage 4 cancer and they are dying, and then something happens and suddenly they look suddenly healthy and all of their metrics are improving, labs are improving. Finally, the doctors rescan them, and not only is the cancer somehow healed or gone, there's absolutely no evidence it was ever there. That happens with stunning regularity in our space of medicine, and we write it off, we hide it, we rationalize it, we all kinds of things to deny that existence of that thing, because if that is true, then there is no role for a drug. There's no role for anything outside of the patient itself, because that individual is the vessel that remembers its original design. The original design is the relationship between the imagination of nature, we could call that God, the imagination of God itself, bringing to fruition a planet, bringing to fruition a species on that planet. There was such perfect vision of what that species would look like that it would emerge like that at some point. And so something in nature is imagining itself, reimagining itself, such that with every death, something more spectacular is born out of it. And so there is this ascension pattern where it's more complex, more biodiverse, more beautiful with every single reimagination of existence, of nature, of life, all the way up. And so now we are asked to dance in this space of the masculine and feminine completing itself within a single individual. And this is where it comes back to that sad realization that the one place we do not believe this is possible is within our own bodies. And so we reach outside of ourselves to complete the masculine and feminine all the time. And we don't just do this with other humans. We do it with the pharmaceuticals. We do it with the things we try to own. Yeah. Owning something is very much a wounded masculine, belief system. The wounded masculine in each and every one of you believes that you need something to make yourself happy, and that need of that other thing, that outside thing, to bring peace, happiness, comfort, and all that is your wounded masculine expressing itself.
Did the teachings of Magdalene change something in you where you felt more whole, or you're like, oh wait, I can't source the feminine from outside of me, I find it inside of me? Like, what is it about that transmission that allows the spontaneous remission to happen? What is it about those missing gospels that creates this sense of wholeness?
For me, I think that what began to happen, and maybe it wasn't instantaneous, but certainly a beginning of a journey that maybe isn't even complete or anywhere near complete yet, but it began in me a deep understanding that I had been reaching outside of myself to experience love. And when you reach outside of yourself to try to connect to a vibration, a frequency that can only be the result of seeing beauty, our capacity to see beauty results in this vibration of love. When we keep reaching outside of ourselves for that vibration, we continue to deny that the beauty is within ourselves. And so I had radically discounted my own beauty somewhere deep in my subconscious, probably programmed into me somewhere between ages 3 and 7 years old. Society at large, the kids on the playground, my parents, my grandparents, my church, my entire social system was telling me over and over again in a million different voices that I wasn't enough. I didn't fit in. I didn't, measure up. I wasn't good enough. And they did this subconsciously, consciously. They did it through, all kinds of mechanisms, all of which ultimately boil down to basically 3 vibrations that we've named in different emotions, but they're basically just states of existence: fear, guilt, shame. So try to think about the feeling rather than the emotion of fear. What does it feel like to be in fear? What does it feel like guilty? What does it feel like shame? It's those feelings that have taken the vibrational structure, the literal water conformation inside of every one of your cells, into a lesser complexity, into a lesser beauty. It has degraded the sacred geometry within the crystal structures of the water within your cells, the liquid crystal of your bones. You have been deteriorated by these 3 experiences: fear, guilt, and shame. And then we look at religion, and we look at school systems and the way that they operate. It's all guilt, shame, fear, guilt, shame, fear. And so education, whether it be in the church or the school, is this learning that you are incomplete, this learning that you won't measure up, learning that you're always pursuing some external metric of value to justify your existence, and so that's, I think, sadly, what we're handed, and what I glimpsed in it's what I glimpse in all scriptures from all backgrounds and everything else, is original truth. Before fear, guilt, and shame, what was truth? And what did it feel like to interact with that? And I can open up the King James Bible and be immediately heightened. I can immediately go into an experiential state of truth with the information in there. But if that's my only tuning fork, I'm missing half the symphony, right? And so it's not that any of it's sinful or dark or evil or any of that. It's all high vibrational information over and over again. And a lot of scripture is storytelling of people that are going through, their valley of death and are discovering truth. Through their stress, they are discovering truth. And that's all the Bible stories, So you got all these scriptures, which are, i.e., historical accounts of the struggle against nature and then the discovery of nature within the self. And what is you have to memorize the words there and believe that that's the truth? No, it's the energy that's flowing between the space. The words are holding the masculine. The words are holding the space for you to flow your own spiritual existence through, to find your own beauty. And Magdalene did that so potently to me. I was being seen by a being that had crystallized within herself some appreciation and understanding of the divine masculine and feminine energies within herself, and in her completion she became the perfect mirror to those around her. And perhaps, you know, this Christ figure had no better front row seat to that than anybody else. And so what was transpiring was two humans were actually seeing completed versions of themselves. And our modern texts of the Course in Miracles says that that is what we are striving for humanity. That's what hasn't happened in humanity, is the completion of the masculine and feminine within an individual so that they can be seen. And I think that's the interesting result of completing the masculine and feminine, is you can finally be seen. And so it's interesting that for as, you know, instantaneous of recognition we might have had as human beings, be like, I see you, I know you. What was really happening is you were seeing yourself in me, and you knew that vibration was true. And so my presence was enough to show you something spectacular about you. And we tend to attribute that to the other person. You're an amazing person. Well, that's true. You just can't see me because I am not willing to be seen yet. So I hold an egoic shield somewhere in my subconscious level that no matter how vulnerable I feel like I'm being to you, you're only seeing yourself because I have created a patina, a mirror image, you know, on the outside of me that reflects everybody out back at themselves. And the Course in Miracles says the moment Zach finishes the masculine and feminine within himself, the shield goes down. The ego necessarily, you know, and opportunistically leaves the building because there's no longer a role for it, because the masculine and feminine finished, and therefore nothing is needed by Zach to complete the divine within himself. And so at that moment, you would suddenly see me. And this Course in Miracles says that the moment two individuals actually see each other, there's an instantaneous conformational change in the human condition, and you ascend to these much higher levels of expression. And at that moment, the whole species has the opportunity to rise through that. And if we think back to the stories of Christ and Mary Magdalene and all that, is that not what happened? How is it that 2,000 years later, whether you think religion is bunk or not, whether you think Christ was real or not, whether you think Mary Magdalene was real or not, whether you think they were perfect beings or not, whether you think that that was all fake or not, we're sitting here talking about those two individuals 2,000 years later? What the hell? And so there's something that happened 2,000 years ago between a small group of human beings that created so much conformational change that here we are talking about it 2,000 years later. And so that, I believe, is what the Course in Miracles is saying, is when this happens, those two individuals will see so much beauty that the frequency of love that will be achieved at that moment will be so transformational that it will literally create new portals of existence, new opportunities to rise, to ascend. And so what is the prey and what is the predator? The prey is the ego, waiting to be eaten and to release its the being that it dwells within into that higher existence, to take flight finally. You asked about, you know, the Mary Magdalene journey that I took this summer, and that was the unexpected result of that experience with me. I went to the south of France into this region called the Saint Baume Forest, and it is said that Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene both went to this region of France to live out their lives after the collapse of kind of the stability of the Hebrew and Aramaic peoples within the Roman Empire, and Rome was suffering and all that. And so after this period that we would call Christ's life, these two women traveled to this area, and there's this massive quartz crystal ridge line that runs in the south of France above the Saint Baume Forest, and in that are all these giant, I mean, you can't even sculpt things that are more anatomically correct than those caves being vaginal canals into that area of the planet geologically and geographically. And so we have these, you know, birth canals of the planet put into these that are manifest, you know, self-manifest within nature there. And those two women found that space and lived out their lives there. And there's monasteries built there in honoring them, and the bones of Mary Magdalene there, and all kinds of fascinating things. I went there basically for a sense of just, my self-care, that, boy, this information stream that came through the Gospel of Mary, and then ultimately all the other Magdalene sources that I could get my hands on, so much of my life came back into flow through that information, that I was just going there to pay tribute.
Mm-hmm.
And what I unexpectedly ran into was, an energy field that I experienced as Mary Magdalene or whatnot, and it was a tree, embodied by this energy, and it nearly just tore me apart. I was, for the days following that, surprised that I survived the experience, because it was the most horrific torrent of energy I'd ever walked into in this physical life. I felt like I was being torn apart. I felt like I was being diminished to my biologic expression. I didn't know if I would even be able to take another breath when I was in the presence of this much tearing information and energy. And the energy was that of grief, the purest, most complete, most powerful vibration of grief. That if you'd said the word grief to me 10 months ago, I'd be like, oh yeah, I've experienced grief, lose a patient in clinic, or lose a grandparent, lose a dog, whatever. Yeah, I've experienced grief. I have never experienced grief as a human being until I experienced whatever that energy field was. And while I'm experiencing this complete biologic deconstruction within the vibration of grief, this constant message is just flowing through. This is what unconditional love feels like. This is what unconditional love feels like. And I still haven't fully figured out all of the meanings of that, but I can say experientially, that's the level of grief that I should have, and at moments can feel in myself, every moment that I am given the gift of life and don't step into my full masculine and feminine completion. I have such grief that I am taking a breath and manifesting 70 trillion human cells that work in cooperation with, 40 quadrillion other microorganisms within me, outside of me, inside of me, to become something brighter than a sun by 10,000 times. And I take up the universe's space and in time and creative capacity, and don't let go of that ego and don't ascend. So heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking that I would not take that opportunity. And I don't take the opportunity because I'm afraid. And that's why all of us have stayed in this vibration, is we are afraid to let go of the version of ourselves that we can see, because we have been disempowered from our own imagination. And we can only imagine that which we've experienced. And so because we cannot imagine what it would be like to be a Magdalene completed in the masculine and feminine, to be a Christ energy completed in the masculine and feminine, and we cannot believe how beautiful we are, and so we do not imagine it, and so we cling to the ego, and we stay split, and then we go into human relationship. The Course in Miracles calls that special relationship. Special relationship is defined in a very simple sentence. It ties back to one of your original things you wanted to hit on in this podcast, I think, at the beginning, which was the story of emptying out or being drained. The one sentence definition of a special relationship, which is said to be all forms of relationship that we do, whether to one another or to other things. A special relationship is a situation where you will look outside of yourself to another, and you will see in that person a trait that you don't believe you can get straight from the source, from the God, divine, whatever it is. And in not believing you can have it, you see that in them, and you go and cleave to that. You connect to that. And in so doing, you will now drain that person of that trait until it is gone, and then you will leave. That's a very terrifying one-sentence description of human relationships. And so when I read that and realized in that moment, I could immediately identify what trait that I had seen in my wife and partner of 20 years. I thought I was in the best marriage that anybody could have, because I was living out a very low vibration version of relationship that I had been taught was high vibration, that I had been taught was the whole purpose. And so be a good, husband and father, but it ended. Broke my heart, did all the usual typical things. But as soon as I read that Course in Miracles line, oh my gosh, I know exactly what trait I saw in that woman that I cleaved to and drained out of her over a 20-year journey, leaving her completely empty of her greatest things. And now I get to see her as one of my dearest friends, filled back up and living out and expressing those things that I had drained out of her in this special relationship that I had been trained to do. And so I had enough experience in my life by the time I read the Course in Miracles definition of that I knew it was true. Every relationship I've had, to coworkers, to schools and education systems, to every one of my 10,000 patients that I've had, I am sorry. I am so sorry I drained out of you the most beautiful things that God expressed through you, for my fear that I couldn't have those things myself. And I am sorry to all of you that I have been such a source of drain on the human condition, for my fear that I couldn't be complete, that I couldn't be directly loved enough by God, that I would seek to connect to all of you for that. It has been a very challenging and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful journey with the information streaming through, much more than Magdalene, really the whole feminine capacity for sure, but really this deeper truth of the masculine and feminine in its completion is what creates miracle.
Yes.
The masculine and feminine in its completion within a single individual is what causes the divine to express itself, to birth, to ascend, to become a keystone species. What would it feel like to be a being that everything I touched was in holy relationship rather than special relationship? And then the Course in Miracles is very clear about what that looks like. Holy relationships, completion, masculine and feminine, every single individual. And suddenly we only can see and represent beauty to one another. And we do not drain each other. In fact, we are filled with overwhelming appreciation and gratitude and love for being witnessed by the other, because we can finally be seen. And that's ultimately what every human being is striving for, is the opportunity to be seen. And so when we take that step back and realize, oh my gosh, this is the entire human condition, it gets really, really exciting, because my gosh, it is actually no effort to let the masculine and feminine completely intercourse within myself. That ecstasy is waiting to happen every millionth of a second in the quantum physics of who I am, because I do hold space to be a body, and I do have blood that flows through my veins, and I am the masculine and feminine, and I am the expression of every intelligence on this planet within the universe. And if I will just surrender to that for a second and stop reaching outside of myself and come back inside myself, that's an orgasmic state of living.
So speaking of Eros, which I'd love for you to define for us, but we've been talking a lot on this just because this is the thing that I'm really stoked about these days, is sacred sexuality, transmuting your creation energy, this erotic energy that's alive inside of all of us, and then using it to fuel the life you really want to live. And then what's really exciting to me is creating a huge collective antenna, and a lot of people birthing this new earth that our hearts know is possible, right? What Charles wrote about in his book. And most of my guests on the show so far have been people who identify as women. And so there's a lot of the divine feminine talk. And so I would love for you to share like how you, someone who identifies as male, one, work with sacred sexuality, transmute sexual energy into creating things in your world. And then two, and this is probably a bigger question, like live such a life of devotion to the divine feminine, to goddess energy.
It's the same question.
Great.
I mean, fundamentally, eros and ethics are inseparable.
And how would you define each?
So eros is the force of life, allurement, presence, attraction, and also in some cases repulsion. It's almost the magnetism of the entire cosmos.
The magnetism of the cosmos. Yeah.
And it was actually, so it was symbolized in the two cherubs that were intertwisted at the top of the Temple of Solomon, who carried this lineage transmission of eros and connecting it to Shekinah.
And who's Shekinah?
Shekinah is kind of eros embodied as a goddess, right? So it's the force of eros. It's a simple way to say it, but there's many ways that you could describe Shekinah. She's often called the bride, but that doesn't quite fit. That's more in the Malchut kind of. There's a variety of different ways to describe it, but as
Embodiment is of eros.
Yeah. in a way, but it's so ever present in every man and every woman and every, bite of food and everything. It was actually really, the symbol was created as the two cherubs on top of the Ark of the Covenant on top of the temple in Jerusalem. And Shekinah wasn't either one of the cherubs. It was the space between. It was the thing that drew them together to intertwine and get into that dance. So
the third thing that is created
exactly.
when the energies and the polarities merge.
Exactly. And that's Eros. And, again, as Rabbi Mark Gaffney shares, like the sexual models the erotic, but does not exhaust it. So we think of erotic and we think of sex. And yes, sex can and should be erotic. And also it's just a model for living your life erotically, like Rumi, the poet, who is constantly talking about the great beloved. And you imagine that great beloved was a man or a woman or whoever he was attracted to, when in reality, the great beloved was his love affair with God, and or Shekinah or whatever the name is that you want to say, but it was his love affair with life.
Yeah, like what you seek is seeking you, right? That's that magnetism.
Yeah.
If you have the desire, then it has the desire for you as well.
Yep.
And so how do you, like, if you feel comfortable sharing, like, personally use that Eros, that energy to, or do you use that to create what you're creating in the world?
So go back to younger Aubrey. And my desire, my craving for the goddess was so strong that I recognized that, okay. And I remember one very defining moment. And again, this is young Aubrey. I actually went by the name Chris then. I had two middle names. Chris and Aubrey were my middle names. People call me Chris. I switched that to Aubrey, but that's a bracket, not important. But anyways, so young Chris Marcus, fake ID, 20 years old. I go to a burlesque show in Vegas called La Femme, and it was based on the burlesque show in Paris, the famous one at the Crazy Horse. Gorgeous, like abs, like the way that they play with lights and music and the dancers. It was stunning. And I remember I had Crown Royal on the rocks, and I was, again, fake ID. And I'm just sipping that. And I'm a 20-year-old college kid, right? And these are like gorgeous professional dancers, like women, like the goddess embodied. They were like Shekinah embodied. The allurement I was feeling was like through the roof, right? They were like expressing this element of femininity and sexuality that was so far beyond whatever I could cultivate. And I was like, man, how on earth would I get a date with one of these women? Like, how do I become a great enough man that they would say yes if I said, hey, you want to go out? Like a goddess of that kind of power, of Vailana. Like, how could I be the man that the Vailana would be like, yeah. And so I saw the world. I looked at the world and I saw, like, all right, what does the world show me? What is the world teaching me? Well, you need to have resources. You need to have personal power. You need to have a variety. You need to have a healthy, strong body. You need to have all of these things that are still a part of what I am. But it was very much focused. So the Eros, my desire to actually be and meet a goddess of that level. And again, I didn't talk to them. I don't know how they were in conversation or whatever, but that's the energy I felt. The energy I felt from them, the power. It's like, I will do whatever it takes to be the type of man that could be with one of those women, whatever it takes. And that was not limited to one thing. I didn't say, I just got to get the money. Or it wasn't like Scarface, or I just got to get the power. It was like holistically, across the board, intellectually, my humor, my kindness, my love, my ferocity, my wealth, my influence, all of that needs to be in line. So that drew me forward in a fundamental way. And there's still aspects of that draw me forward. I'm not going to say that has left. It's been included and transcended. But the first pull of Eros was the pull to my greatness so that I could be a match for the goddess, which I wanted so bad.
So beautiful. Sweet friends, thank you so much for tuning into this bonus episode. So if this conversation woke something up inside of you, if you can feel that magnetism, that creativity, that divine feminine stirring inside of you, then I invite you to join me for Magic Maker live on July 22nd. You can go to makemagic.zivameditation.com and join me and thousands of people from all around the planet to get crystal clear on what heaven on earth looks like, not just for ourselves, but for the collective. This is where you can experience in real time what it means to bring your magic back into your body and into your life. So go to makemagic.zivameditation.com and you can save your free spot and take the quiz to prepare you for this event. I love you, I love you, I love you, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share it with a friend, and you can invite them for the activation as well. I think the more people we have holding the frequency of heaven on earth in their bodies right here, right now, the more impactful it will be. I'll see you on July 22nd.